Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are getting into some seriously tricky legal puzzles. When is just doing nothing actually a crime? And when you do something, how does the law figure out who's really to blame when it all goes wrong? All right, let's get into it. Okay, just imagine this for a second. You're walking by a river and you see someone flailing in the water. They are clearly drowning. Now, you're a decent swimmer and there's a life preserver, like right there. It would be super easy and totally safe for you to help. But you don't. You just stand there and watch as they go under. Your gut is probably screaming that this is wrong, right? But the real question is, from a legal standpoint, are you a criminal?
And here's the first big shocker. While your conscience might be yelling yes, English law gives a surprisingly clear and simple no. What feels like an obvious moral failure is not, in the eyes of the law, a crime. See, unlike in places like France or Germany, there's no general duty to be a good Samaritan.
So, what's going on here? Why the huge gap between what feels right and what the law says? Well, it all boils down to one massive idea: individual liberty. The law really values your freedom to choose to act or not to act. The criminal law isn't supposed to be some kind of morality police, forcing you to be a hero. Its job is to punish you for doing bad things, not force you to do good ones. But, and this is a huge but, that idea has some really important limits. Because, you see, while there's no general rule to help, the law has carved out some very specific situations where that choice to just walk away is taken right out of your hands. These are the big exceptions, the moments where doing nothing does become a crime. Think of them as the 5 gateways to a legal duty. So here they are. These are the 5 scenarios where the law basically steps in and says, nope, you have to act. If you find yourself in one of these situations, a legal duty to take reasonable steps is placed squarely on your shoulders. Let's break down that first one. First up, special relationships. And the most obvious one, of course, is a parent and their child. Because a child is so dependent, a parent has a crystal clear legal duty to care for them. Failing to give them food or shelter or get them medical help, that's not just a moral wrong, it's a criminal omission. Okay, the second gateway is when you voluntarily decide to take care of someone else. The textbook case here is a really sad one called Stone and Dobinson. A couple took in an elderly, vulnerable relative. They tried to care for her, but they were just awful at it, and she died in these just horrific conditions. The court said, look, by taking her in, you assumed a duty of care, and your failure to get her proper help was a criminal breach of that duty. Next up, your job can actually create a legal duty to act. There's this old case, R.V. Pitwood, about our railway gatekeeper. He went for his lunch break and just forgot to close the gate. A train came along, smashed into a cart, and killed a man. His failure to do his job, doing nothing, was found to be the cause of death. He was convicted of manslaughter because his contract created a duty to keep the public safe. There's also a fourth gateway called statutory duty. That's when a specific law tells you that you have to do something, like report a car accident you're involved in. And that brings us to the final gateway, creating a dangerous situation yourself. The case of R.V. Miller is the perfect, kind of bizarre example. A squatter falls asleep while smoking, and he wakes up to find his mattress is smoldering. So what does he do? Instead of putting it out or calling for help, he just gets up and moves to another room. The court said that by accidentally starting that fire, he created a danger, and that gave him a duty to act. He couldn't just walk away from a mess he'd made. Okay, so we've seen when doing nothing is a crime. But now, let's flip the script. What happens when you do act, but the story gets messy? You punch someone. They fall. An ambulance shows up. But who's actually to blame if they end up dying? This whole tangle is what lawyers call causation. Causation is basically this chain of blame that the prosecution has to prove, link by link. It's not enough for them to just show you did something wrong. They have to prove your specific action caused the specific criminal outcome. And to do that, they have to jump through 2 different hoops. First, they have to prove factual causation, and they use what's called the but-for test. It's like the first really basic question you have to ask. But for what the defendant did, would the result have happened anyway? If the answer is yes, then you move on to the second hoop, legal causation. This is a bit more nuanced. It asks, was the defendant's action a substantial and operating cause of the result? It doesn't have to be the only cause, but it has to be more than just a tiny, trivial one. The but-for test is perfectly summed up in this famous old case, R.V. White. A son put cyanide in his mother's drink, trying to kill her. but she ended up having a heart attack and died before the poison even had a chance to work. So you ask the question, but for him poisoning the drink, would she have died? Well, yeah, she would have. Her heart attack was completely separate. So he failed the factual causation test. He couldn't be guilty of her murder, only attempted murder. So, let's say the prosecution proves your action was both a factual and a legal cause. Are you definitely on the hook? Well, not always, because sometimes something else happens. An event so out of the blue or an action by someone else so independent that it actually breaks that chain of causation. It's a real plot twist, and lawyers call it a novus actus interveniens. One of the most common places you see this is with medical treatment that goes wrong. But look at these cases. The bar to break the chain is incredibly high. In cases like Smith and Cheshire, even with some pretty bad medical care, the court still said the original wound was a major reason for the death. The chain wasn't broken. It was only in the super rare case of Jordan, where the treatment was called palpably wrong, that the chain was finally snapped. The message from the courts is clear. You don't get to stab someone and then just blame the doctors. Now, the other big way that chain can get broken is if someone else makes a free, deliberate, and informed choice that leads to the final harm. This is where the law gets really philosophical, right? It's trying to figure out whose choice really caused the end result. Let's trace how this works in the huge case of R.V. Kennedy. So, Kennedy prepares a syringe of heroin for another man. The man then takes that syringe and injects himself. Tragically, he overdoses and dies. So, was Kennedy guilty of manslaughter? The court said no. And here's why. The victim's action of injecting himself was a free, deliberate, and informed choice. That voluntary act is what broke the chain of causation leading back to Kennedy. But, and this is a really important but, there's a famous rule that pushes back against the idea of a victim's choice breaking the chain. It's called the thin skull rule. Basically, it means you're responsible for the results of your actions, even if the victim is unusually vulnerable, whether that's a physical thing, a mental one, or even a spiritual belief. In the case of R.V. Blay, a woman who was a Jehovah's Witness was stabbed. She needed a blood transfusion to live, but she refused it because of her religious beliefs and she died. The attacker actually argued her refusal broke the chain of causation. The court's answer? A hard no. He had to take his victim as he found her, beliefs and all. So, as you can see, figuring out who's criminally responsible is not always simple. The law is constantly trying to draw these really careful lines between our freedom as individuals and our responsibilities to society, between an initial bad act and a final tragic outcome. So what are the big takeaways from all this? Well, first, just doing nothing is only a crime if you're in one of those 5 special situations where there's a legal duty to act. Second, to be guilty, your actions have to be both a but-for cause and a substantial legal cause of what happened. And finally, that chain of blame can be broken, but it takes something really major, like a truly independent act or a completely extraordinary event to do it. And all of this brings us right back to where we started. These legal rules are trying their best to strike a balance, but they leave us with this fundamental question about the kind of society we want. Should the law demand that we be heroes? Should it force us to help each other? Or is the freedom to do nothing, to just walk on by, a right that's too important for us to give up? That's a tough one to think about. Thanks for watching.